June 29, 1958. A 17-year-old boy stands in the tunnel of Resunda Stadium in Sweden, about to walk onto the pitch for the biggest match of his life. He is thin, wiry, barely a man by chronological measure. His name is Edson Arantes do Nascimento. The world does not yet know him, but in 90 minutes, everything changes. To understand why this boy carries a burden far heavier than teenage nerves, to understand why his heartbeat pounds with something close to terror, we must travel back 8 years, to a summer afternoon when joy died in Brazil. July 16, 1950. The Maracanã Stadium, Rio de Janeiro. Nearly 200,000 people filled every seat, every stairwell, every standing space of the colossal concrete bowl, the largest crowd ever assembled for a football match. The official attendance would be recorded as 199,854, though some insisted the real number exceeded 200,000. They had come to witness a coronation. Brazil, playing on home soil, needed only a draw against Uruguay in the decisive match of the World Cup's final round to claim the trophy. The hosts had demolished Sweden 7-1 and Spain 6-1 in their previous matches. Celebration preparations were already underway. Newspaper editors had pre-written victory headlines. The Maracanã's public address system had rehearsed the champion's announcement. Brazil could not lose. Brazil would not lose. When Friaca scored for Brazil 2 minutes into the second half, the roar was said to shake the very structure of a stadium. The crowd surged. Firecrackers exploded. The party began. But football obeys no script and respects no narrative. In the 66th minute, Juan Alberto Schiaffino equalized for Uruguay. The stadium's energy shifted, not to silence, not yet, but to something tighter, more anxious, a collective holding of breath. Then, in the 79th minute, Alcides Guja, a stocky Uruguayan winger whose darting runs had tormented Brazilian defenders all afternoon, drove the ball low and hard past goalkeeper Moça Barbosa. Uruguay 2, Brazil 1. Silence. 199,000 people fell silent in an instant. Newspapers the following day described it as the loudest silence ever heard. People wept openly. Others sat motionless for long minutes after the final whistle, unable to process what they had witnessed. Some fans reportedly fainted. The event acquired a name that would haunt Brazilian football for decades: the Maracanazo, the Maracanã blow. The aftermath extended far beyond the pitch. Barbosa, the goalkeeper, was scapegoated for the remainder of his life. Decades later, he would remark that the maximum penalty for a crime in Brazil was 30 years, but his imprisonment had lasted 50. He died in 2000, still carrying a nation's blame. For Brazil, the defeat was not a sporting loss. It was a wound in the national soul, a confirmation of every insecurity a young nation harbored about its place in the world. Edson Arantes do Nascimento was born on October 23, 1940, in Três Corações, a town in the state of Minas Gerais whose name translates to 3 hearts. The irony would prove prophetic. Edson's life will be defined by the interplay of 3 hearts: his own, his father's, and the collective heart of a nation. The family relocated to Bauru in Sao Paulo state when Edson was still young, following Dondinho's attempt to rebuild a football career that had been derailed by injury. Dondinho had once been a promising center forward, a man who, according to Pelē's own account to FIFA, scored 5 headers in a single match, a feat Pelé said made him prouder than almost anything else about his father. But a knee injury had cut short Dondinho's professional ambitions, and by the time the family settled in Bauru, he was playing semi-professionally and working odd jobs to support his household. Poverty defined Edson's earliest years. The family home lacked electricity in its early days. Meals were sometimes scarce. Young Edson shined shoes on Bauru streets to earn spare change, supplementing his father's meager income. He could not afford a real football, the kind stitched from leather panels and inflated with a bladder. Instead, he stuffed rags into rolled-up socks, tied them with string, and kicked them through Bauru's unpaved streets with a gang of friends who shared similar deprivation and similar dreams. These improvised balls, called bolas de Maia, sock balls, became Edson's first teachers. The street games of Bauru were not the structured, coached environments that European academies offered. They were raw, chaotic, contested among dozens of children on uneven ground with no referee, and no rules beyond the unwritten code of survival. Matches lasted until darkness or exhaustion called a halt. The surfaces were punishing: hard-packed dirt, broken cobblestones, slopes and ridges that sent the ball rolling unpredictably. Bare feet developed calluses that, paradoxically, gave these children a sensitivity to the ball that shod players often lacked. Every touch was a negotiation with an unforgiving surface. From this chaos, something extraordinary emerged in Edson. He possessed a quality that coaches call touch, an instinctive relationship between foot and ball that went beyond training, beyond imitation, beyond anything that could be taught. Where other children kicked, Edson guided. Where others chased the ball, Edson seemed to anticipate where it would arrive before the kicker himself knew. He played not as if the game was happening to him, but as if he was conducting it. 3 or 4 moves ahead, occupying spaces that had not yet opened. Dindinho, despite his own thwarted ambitions, became his son's first and most important coach. He coached a local youth team called Bauru Athletic Club's junior side and trained Edson in fundamentals: passing, shooting, heading, positioning. But perhaps more importantly, Dindinho taught his son a philosophy: that football was meant to be played with joy, not fear. The memory of the Maracanã and the weight his father carried from that day gave Edson's training an urgency that transcended ordinary ambition. He was not playing for fame. He was not playing for money. He was playing to fulfill a promise, a debt owed not to agents or sponsors or crowds, but to a weeping man in a wooden chair. By the age of 11, Edson's reputation had spread beyond his immediate neighborhood. Local coaches and rival teams spoke of a boy who could do things with football that defied conventional explanation. He scored goals at a pace that embarrassed age-appropriate competitions. His body, though small, seemed to generate power disproportionate to its size, a trait inherited from Dindinho, whose heading ability had once been the stuff of local legend. One man who heard these rumors would change everything. His name was Waldemar de Brito, a former Brazilian international who had played in the 1934 World Cup and now scouted for talent in the Sao Paulo region. De Brito had seen prodigies before. Brazil produced gifted footballers the way other nations produce wheat, in abundance, with occasional surplus. But something in the descriptions of the boy from Bauru compelled him to make the journey. When he arrived and watched Edson play, what he found astonished him. According to accounts from this period, De Brito watched a single session and declared that this boy would become the greatest football player in the world. It was an audacious claim made about a child barely into his teens, but De Brito was convinced. He arranged for Edson to travel to Santos, a coastal city south of Sao Paulo, for a trial with Santos Futebol Clube, one of Brazil's most respected professional clubs. The journey from Bauru to Santos covered roughly 400 kilometers. For a boy who had rarely traveled beyond his hometown, it was a voyage to another world. He traveled with little besides his boots and the quiet conviction that his promise demanded everything from him, not someday, but now. Santos Futebol Clube in 1956 was a club waiting for its moment. The team had won the Sao Paulo State Championship, the Campeonato Paulista, only twice in its history. Its stadium, Vila Belmiro, held roughly 20,000 spectators. The facilities, by European standards, were modest. No state-of-the-art training center, no sports science laboratory, no army of analysts crunching data. What Santos possessed was a tradition of nurturing young talent and a coaching staff with an instinct for spotting potential that transcended physical measurements. Edson arrived for his trial in 1955 at the age of 15. Accounts from those who witnessed his first training sessions describe a shift in atmosphere. The moment he touched the ball, something changed. Coaches stopped correcting. Older players stopped talking. The ball obeyed the boy as though connected by invisible thread. He controlled passes that arrived at awkward heights with a single, cushioned touch. He struck shots with a clean, crisp technique that seemed impossible for someone so young. He read the movement of other players, teammates and opponents alike, as if the game were unfolding in slow motion around him. Within weeks, Santos had signed him. Within months, he was training with the first team. On September 7, 1956, Brazil's Independence Day, Edson Arantes do Nascimento made a professional debut for Santos FC. He was 15 years old. He scored in that match. The local press, searching for a headline worthy of what they had witnessed, settled on the nickname the boy had carried since childhood, Pelé, the origin of the name, remains debated even now. Pelé himself has said he does not know precisely where it came from, though it may have derived from his mispronunciation of the name Bile, a goalkeeper his father admired. Whatever its source, the name will become synonymous with genius, recognized on every continent, spoken in every language, belonging not to a man but to an idea. By 1957, Pelé was a regular starter for Santos. In his first full season, he finished as the Campeonato Paulista's top scorer, 36 goals in 29 matches. He was 16 years old. The boy who had kicked sock balls through Bauru's dusty streets was now the most exciting prospect in Brazilian football, and possibly the most exciting the country had ever produced. But statistics alone cannot capture what Pelé brought to the pitch. Contemporary accounts describe a player who combined explosive physical power with an almost balletic grace. He could accelerate past offenders in a blur, then stop dead, letting the opponent overrun him before darting in the opposite direction. He could strike a ball with either foot, a rarity in that era of specialists. He could outjump men far taller than himself, timing his leap with precision that negated his modest height. He read the game like a chess grandmaster, seeing 12 moves ahead, occupying spaces that did not yet exist, creating angles that geometry would struggle to explain. He played not as a machine executing rehearsed patterns, but as an artist improvising on a canvas that stretched the full dimensions of the field. And yet, for all his brilliance, Pelé remained a teenager. He was homesick. He called his mother regularly from a telephone that cost him coins he could barely afford. He missed Bauru, missed his friends, missed the simplicity of street football with no audience and no pressure. The Santos players were older men, some in their late 20s and 30s, who had families, cars, lives built around a profession. Pelé was a boy living in a dormitory, eating club meals, trying to grow into a body that talent had outpaced. The promise to his father was a flame that warmed and burned in equal measure. Every goal he scored brought the fulfillment of that vow closer. Every match, every training session, every lonely evening in the dormitory was a step toward Sweden, toward the World Cup he had sworn to win. But between Bauru and Stockholm lay a distance that could not be measured in kilometers. It was measured in goals, in selections, in the judgment of coaches who would decide whether a teenager belonged on the sport's grandest stage. The national team came calling in 1957. Pelé made his debut for Brazil on July 7, 1957, against Argentina, scoring in a 2-1 defeat. By the end of that year, his trajectory was undeniable. Brazil's head coach, Vicente Fiola, was assembling a squad for the 1958 World Cup. Pelé was in the conversation, but the tournament was 8 months away, and the path from prodigy to world champion would demand tests the boy had not yet imagined. The 1958 World Cup, held in Sweden, represented Brazil's first opportunity to confront the ghost of 1950. 8 years had passed since the Maracanazo, but the wound had not healed. If anything, the national obsession with that defeat had deepened, a scar tissue of collective grief that tightened with each passing year, each tournament that ended without redemption. Every Brazilian player selected for the squad carried an invisible weight, the memory of the silence that had descended over Maracanã like a funeral shroud. Vicente Fiola's squad was carefully constructed. Veterans like Nilton Santos, Didi, and Vava provided backbone and experience. A mercurial right-winger named Garincha, whose dribbling bordered on the supernatural, whose legs were slightly different lengths giving him an unnatural, swerving gait, offered width and unpredictability. And Pelé, the 17-year-old sensation from Santos, was included despite concerns about his age and a knee injury that had lingered to the spring of 1958. Not everyone was convinced. The Brazilian delegation had brought along a psychologist, a practice common in that era, who evaluated the players through drawings and interviews. According to later accounts, the psychologist's assessment of Pelé was damning. He judged the teenager as obviously infantile and concluded that he did not possess the sense of responsibility for a team game. The recommendation was to leave him out. Fiola disagreed. The coach trusted his own eyes over the psychologist's projections. Pelé himself has described arriving in Sweden with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. He was surrounded by players he had idolized, competing for a place in a starting 11 that contained seasoned internationals with decades of experience. The Swedish climate was a shock. Cool, gray, and damp, a stark contrast to the warmth of Brazil. The long Nordic summer evenings felt strange. He felt the isolation acutely, compounded by the language barrier and the knee injury that limited his early training. He called home. He thought about his father. He thought about the promise. Brazil's group stage performances reflected a team finding its rhythm. They defeated Austria 3-0 in their opening match. Pelé did not start, watching from the bench. Then came a 0-0 draw with England, a notoriously physical encounter that left Brazilian players bruised and frustrated. Again, Pelé remained on the bench. When Fiola finally started in the third group match against the Soviet Union, he showed flashes of his ability, but did not score. The tournament was proceeding without the eruption Brazil's press had been anticipating from their teenage prodigy. But something was building. The opening minutes of that Soviet Union match, in which both Garrincha and Pelé hit the goalpost and Vava scored twice, have been described by some football historians as the greatest 3 minutes in the history of the game. The Soviets, a formidable, disciplined team, were torn apart by Brazil's attacking verve. Pelé, though scoreless, was at the center of everything, creating space, drawing defenders, linking play. The warning had been issued. In the quarterfinal, Brazil faced Wales. The match was tight, tense, decided by a single goal. It came in the 65th minute. Pelé received the ball with his back to goal, a Welsh defender pressing close behind him. With one touch, he controlled the ball. With a second, he flicked it past the defender, spinning away. With a third, he slotted it past the goalkeeper. The finish was composed, clinical, executed with the calm of a player operating with instincts far beyond his 17 years. It was his first World Cup goal. Brazil advanced 1-0. The semi-final pitched Brazil against France, whose attack was led by Gisfontaine, a striker on his way to the tournament's Golden Boot with a record 13 goals that still stands. What followed was not a contest. It was a coronation. Brazil won 5-2, and Pelé scored a hat trick. 3 goals in a World Cup semi-final at 17 years and 244 days old. The French players, some of whom had never heard of the boy before kickoff, left the pitch looking shaken, as though they had witnessed something from outside the normal parameters of the sport. Sweden awaited, the host nation, the final between Brazil and redemption, between a boy and the promise he had made to his father. June 29, 1958. Rosunda Stadium, Solna, Sweden. Nearly 50,000 spectators filled the arena, a fraction of the Maracanã's colossal gathering, but no less significant. Sweden, the host nation, had reached the World Cup final for the first time in their history. Their supporters filled the stands with hope and partisan songs. Brazil's supporters, those who had traveled across the Atlantic and those clustered around radios back home, filled the air with something heavier, something more desperate, the need for redemption. The Brazilian players walked onto the pitch wearing yellow jerseys that seemed impossibly bright under the Nordic sun. Among them, the smallest figure was also the youngest. Pelé, 17 years and 249 days old, trotted across the grass with the measured stride of a boy trying to appear calm. His eyes scanned the stadium. Somewhere in Bauru, Dondinho would be listening. Somewhere across Brazil, millions would be holding their breath. Sweden struck first. In the 4th minute, Nils Lidholm, a Swedish captain whose elegance on the ball belied his 36 years, drove a low shot past Brazilian goalkeeper Gilmar. The stadium erupted. For a moment, a new ghost seemed to rise from the Swedish turf. The specter of 1950, when an early Brazilian lead had dissolved into catastrophe. The familiar pattern threatened. Brazil scores, joy erupts, and then the floor falls away. Could it happen again? Could a World Cup final turn against Brazil one more time? But this was not 1950. These were not the same men. And this was not a team that would crumble. 5 minutes after Sweden's opener, Vava equalized. Before halftime, he scored again. At the break, Brazil led 2-1, and the momentum had shifted decisively. Then the second half belonged to a 17-year-old. In the 55th minute, Pelé received the ball in the penalty area with a Swedish defender marking him tightly, arms across his body. What happened next has been replayed thousands of times, analyzed frame by frame, described in dozens of languages. With one touch, Pelé flicked the ball into the air over the defender's head. As the ball rose, he pivoted, spinning away from the marker. As the ball descended, he struck it on the volley, a thunderous, rising shot that flew past the Swedish goalkeeper and into the roof of the net. The technique required was absurd. The timing of the flick, the precision of the spin, the power and placement of the volley, all executed in a single, fluid sequence that lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It was a goal that seemed to belong to a different sport entirely, the kind of goal that makes defenders question their profession and goalkeepers question their presence. Pelé added a second in the 90th minute, heading home across with the technique his father had taught him. The technique Dondino himself had once used to score 5 headers in a single match. The symmetry was almost too perfect to believe. A header, the skill of father, passed to his son, delivered on the sport's grandest stage. The final score was Brazil 5, Sweden 2. As the whistle blew, Pelé collapsed to the turf. He lay on the Swedish grass, sobbing. His teammates lifted him. Cameras captured his face. Tears streaming, mouth open in a wordless shout that carried 8 years of promise, sacrifice, and the accumulated weight of a nation's broken heart. Pelé later recounted that in that moment, lying on the grass in Sweden, he thought of his father. In interviews, he described the feeling of having kept his word, the whispered promise made to a weeping man in a modest home, now fulfilled on the other side of the world. Brazil had won its first World Cup. The Maracanã, the wound that had refused to heal for 8 years, was closed. Back home, the celebrations were unlike anything the country had seen. In Rio, in Sao Paulo, in Bauru, in Três Corações, people poured into the streets. The silence of 1950 was overwritten by noise, laughter, music, honking horns, firecrackers, drums. Radio announcers wept on air. Newspapers printed the word that mattered most: Campeão, champions. Pelé returned to Brazil as a hero, but more than a hero, he returned as a redeemer, the boy who had promised to heal a wound and delivered. When Dondinho embraced his son at the airport, words were unnecessary. The promise had crossed 8 years and 8,000 kilometers and arrived, whole and redeemed. The 9-year-old who had whispered, "Don't cry, Papa," was 17 now, standing on a tarmac in Brazil with a World Cup winner's medal around his neck. And somewhere in the memory of both father and son, a radio crackled, a room fell silent, and a boy spoke words that the world would remember. Operating under rules that would seem primitive by modern standards, failed repeatedly to protect him from abuse that borders on assault in any contemporary context. One defender recalled afterward they had orders to mark Pelé by all means necessary. He was kicked, hacked, shoulder charged, and elbowed through matches against Bulgaria, Hungary, and Portugal. Brazil exited in the group stage for only the second time in its history. Pelé walked away from the stadium, vowing never to play in another World Cup. 12 years later, he returned from Mexico in 1970 because his teammates convinced him he deserved one final dance. But the pain of England lingered like an old wound reopening. But betrayal followed even victory. In 1969, Santos owner Carvalho Leite refused Pelé's request for increased wages despite record attendance drawn by their star. Negotiations collapsed into public acrimony. Pelé stayed loyal anyway, refusing offers from European giants who would have paid vastly more. He remained until 1974, departing as Santos had transformed around him, a club evolved from Sao Paulo regional contender into global powerhouse solely through the gravity of one man's orbit. When he left, Santos' average gate dropped by 15,000 spectators within months. The economic truth was undeniable. Pelé wasn't merely a player. He was the franchise. The 1970 World Cup in Mexico stands as Brazil's greatest artistic statement in football. Defending champions arrived depleted after 4-year humiliation, now led by Carlos Alberto Torres as captain, with Rivellino, Jairzinho, Tostão, Gerson forming perhaps the most lethal attacking quartet ever assembled. They traveled without fear, but also without arrogance. Only when Pelé stepped onto Azteca Stadium grass did narrative shift from hope to certainty. He didn't carry goals like his younger self might have. 7 goals across 6 matches. Not explosive dominance, but surgical distribution, opening spaces others finished. Two moments defined this tournament: his header against Czechoslovakia from impossible angles, and the assist versus Uruguay demonstrating vision beyond comprehension. Simple pass drawing defenders wrong way, creating path for teammate finish. Final came versus Italy. Italian defense, anchored by legendary goalkeeper Enrico Albertosi, held Brazil scoreless through 59 minutes. Then cascade began. Gerson opened scoring with low drive outside box. Bonansegna equalized via penalty, breaking Brazilian morale momentarily. But Pelé rose highest, meeting Carlos Alberto cross for header restoring lead 10 seconds later. Second half explosion unfolded. Jairzinho curled shot corner. Roberto Claudio diverted header pass keeper. And finale remained single greatest teamwork goal in World Cup history. 20-yard run involving 5 Brazilians, including goalkeeper Felix, releasing ball initiating chain, culminating Carlos Alberto, arriving late, unmarked, sweeping home, while Italians watched bewildered, unable to react. Final score 4-1 marked the largest margin ever recorded in championship decider through 2026. Third star appeared permanently stitched to Brazil's shirt below emblem forever changing relationship nation, maintained with success. No player won 3 gold balls across tournaments. Only Pelé achieved this distinction, separating him from Maradona, Zidane, Messi, who each captured single editions. Even Jurgen Klinsmann or Lothar Matthäus couldn't replicate sustained excellence decade-spanning appearances required. Record still stands unmatched 86 years following retirement announcement. When FIFA created Best Player Award in 2004 naming Pelé first recipient, gesture acknowledged something deeper than statistics: the impossibility replication future generations attempting climb mountains built 60 years earlier. Retirement came quietly October 1st, 1977, playing farewell match New York Cosmos versus Santos at Giant Stadium before 45,000 witnesses. Ceremony blended nostalgia with celebration, bittersweet acknowledgement, ending era, defining global consciousness differently. Sports television broadcasts brought stadium roar into living rooms, households, disconnected geographies, yet connected emotionally. Film cameras recorded handshake exchanges between former opponents, now mutual admirers. Sharing moment transcended competition itself. Speech delivered measured gratitude, thanking nations, welcoming him, treating guest dignity, regardless unfamiliar countries, foreign languages, incomprehensible, yet embraced warmly nonetheless. Farewell gift presented. United Nations Peace Medal recognizing contribution diplomacy, performed through athletics rather traditional political channels. Post-retirement pursuits diversified dramatically. Broadcasting career spanned BBC, ESPN, Fox Sports commentary roles explaining nuance of strategy passion, remaining infectious decades removed from active participation. Interviews revealed philosophical approach to life, balance humility with wisdom acquired through hardship triumph, and losses teaching lessons victories provided proof possibility, persisting setbacks, overcoming obstacles systematically. His foundation work rebuilt schools across Africa and Latin America, providing education to millions lacking access. UNESCO named him Goodwill Ambassador in 1994 for peace through sport advocacy. President Obama invited him to White House State Dinner 2015. One of few athletes extended such honor alongside Nelson Mandela, Muhammad Ali, Stevie Wonder. Death approached December 29, 2022, at hospital in Sao Paulo following bowel cancer treatment complications. Tributes poured globally. UN declared week-long mourning. Brazilian parliament observed minute silence. Pope Francis offered prayers from Vatican Radio. But final testament was an official declaration. It was children worldwide still kicking balls barefoot on dusty pitches shouting Pelé during pickup games. That became immortality. Not statues erected or museums constructed, but name whispered reverently by 7-year-olds chasing dreams across continents, unaware fully how deeply they stood upon shoulders giant lifted humanity higher than anyone believed possible. A boy who promised father he'd bring World Cup home ended up bringing far more. Belief itself, restored to a nation brokenhearted 13 years prior. Fulfillment transcended silver medal trophy. Heart healed permanently.